from the rotten core of the Big Apple. Don't miss all the action of the new police drama, New York Undercover, 9:30 Wednesday on 10.
Good evening, I'm Sandra Sully. This is the Late Night News. Heading the Late Night News, our new defence ally, Indonesia's historic security agreement with Australia. Queensland Premier Wayne Goss tries to convince Mundingburra that dumping its MP was the only option. And the designer drug ecstasy nabbed in a major drug bust in Sydney. We begin tonight with Australia's new security treaty with Indonesia, a nation which used to be regarded as our greatest threat. Prime Minister Keating is flying home tonight after witnessing the historic signing in Jakarta. But the federal opposition claims the deal was done without the total approval of Foreign Minister Gareth Evans.
A defining moment in Australia's foreign policy history today. Prime Minister Keating and Indonesia's long-serving leader witnessed the historic ceremony in the presidential palace this afternoon. Foreign Minister Gareth Evans and his Indonesian counterpart, Ali Alatas, signed the landmark treaty. Also present, Deputy Prime Minister Kim Beazley, Defence Minister Robert Ray, and Australia's top military brass.
This agreement is a declaration of trust. It's a declaration of trust about the strategic intentions of each of us.
This security pact is the first of its kind for Australia and commits the two nations to consult each other in the case of adverse challenges. But it's that wording, adverse challenges, instead of external threat, which has sparked controversy from the federal opposition. Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Alexander Downer claims Gareth Evans disapproves of the wording, a point Mr Keating disputes.
He's being verbal here by Mr Downer. So I don't really think that, given his standing, weight, record, or the veracity of his claims, that he's worthy of more time than I've given you.
Earlier, the Prime Minister rejected criticism over the secrecy of the security deal.
Well, if there had been a more public process, there probably wouldn't have been a treaty.
Today's signing marks a new era in diplomatic and defence relations between Australia and Indonesia, with even the usually sombre President Suharto all smiles.
Stephanie Kennedy in Jakarta. Stephanie, what effect will this treaty have?
Well, Sandra, today's signing really was a symbolic act, firstly. In the short term, it probably doesn't mean a lot, but in the long term, it has great significance. It secures Australia's position in the region well into the next century, as the Prime Minister said today. The Prime Minister also said it gives the green light for closer defence cooperation, and no doubt that will upset some of the East Timorese community in Australia. But I believe there'll be a lot more joint operations between the two nations beginning next year and into the next 5 years.
Well, what influence is this treaty likely to have on Keating's political future back here in Australia?
Well, there's no doubt, Sandra, that this has put Prime Minister Keating on a political high. It's a diplomatic coup which no one expected, including the opposition. And as the year of 1995 closes and we go into an election in the next 3 to 4 months, it places Paul Keating in a very good position. There's no doubt about that. It's made him look like the statesman, and that's exactly what he wants the public to perceive him as. Next month, he heads to Malaysia and Singapore, and then he'll go into a federal election. So it puts him in a very good position.
Stephanie Kennedy in Jakarta. The Australian Labor Party is targeting its own angry members in the Queensland state seat of Mundingburra in a campaign to explain why former Minister Ken Davies was dumped. Premier Wayne Goss says there was no option but to replace Mr Davies as candidate for the February by-election. Labor must win to retain government.
With the Goss government's Mundingburra campaign in disarray, Labor Party MPs gathered this morning for the inside story on just why Ken Davies was dumped. Caucus members were told of the court action between Mr Davies and the Commonwealth Bank. If he'd won the by-election but lost the case and was declared bankrupt, he'd be ineligible for Parliament. Party officials had been anxious to assess Mr Davies' legal situation. The Premier told caucus Mr Davies had refused to let Labor lawyers check his legal files, saying it was a private matter. The Premier explained to Labor MPs there was no option but to dump Mr Davies. His words appeared to ease caucus concerns.
Good.
In Townsville, the man who now carries Labor's hopes of retaining government shrugged off suggestions the local branches won't support him over Ken Davies.
My support base is growing. Ken's might be whittling away, mine's growing.
But Ken Davies' Labor supporters tell a different story.
I think there's a lot of anger and disbelief and shock out there at the moment. Ken Davies, if he had remained as Labor candidate, would have been the most suitable candidate.
And a bitter Ken Davies continues to let Labor stew about his plans.
I haven't ruled anything in, I haven't ruled anything out at this stage.
Mark Simmons, 10 News.
Customs officers at Sydney Airport have made one of Australia's biggest seizures of the designer drug ecstasy. An officer became suspicious about information on an English traveller's arrival form.
20,000 ecstasy tablets worth an estimated $1 million on the streets.
That's the largest seizure this year.
The tablets were brought in on a British Airways flight from London via Bangkok last Saturday morning. Customs officials today said the drugs were detected by an alert officer who became suspicious of details on the man's arrival form.
When he came in, some of his particulars he declared to customs on his paperwork did not quite gel. From that he was subject to bag examination.
When the officer searched the suitcase, he discovered 6 kilograms of the designer drug neatly hidden under a false bottom and cleverly secured with Velcro.
It's certainly a method I've not seen used before as far as the Velcro goes. False bottoms, they're quite common.
Federal police say much of the illegal drug is produced locally, not imported.
The levels of seizures that we're having at importations would seem to suggest that it's more local manufacture that's being concerned rather than importation.
A 23-year-old British national has been charged over the haul and will face court next month. Daniela Ongaro, 10 News.
A robber who had just grabbed $20,000 forced a woman to drive him away from the scene in Adelaide's western suburbs today. She raised the alarm after she drove him to Adelaide's city centre.
A thief snatched 2 bags containing $20,000 from a hotel manager about to deposit the week.